Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis, the Praise of Five podcast. I'm once again joined by Florian. Glad to have you back, Florian.
Glad to be here.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook. And you can support the channel on Subscribestar, Locals, and Buy Me a Coffee. So today is the 123rd casual stream, the rise of the tech elite. This sort of goes back to something that you had in the DM'd Keith and I privately on Facebook about what might happen or what some implications that might happen if these tech bros eventually become the new elite, which you argue that looks like they're shaping up to be. So why don't you sort of set the stage for this and we can dig into it?
Yeah, so recently there was like maybe a month ago there was big news. I haven't heard about anything afterwards, but there was a big news that Facebook had hired few superstars to add to their new AI section. And one of these guys, Matt Deitke, was initially offered $125 million. Apparently, he declined. And just think about that. You get offered $125 million to work for Facebook. He declined because he had already enough of his own little project going. And then Zuckerberg apparently met with him in person. So the story goes, and offered him $250 million. And then he said, okay, that was an offer he couldn't refuse, apparently. So, and if you think about it, if Zuckerberg, and I'm just using Facebook as a model for any other tech company, but Zuckerberg is expecting to make $2 billion of revenue. You can still pay your staff 50%, and the AI department that he builds up apparently has 40 people in there. You can pay some superstars $250 million or $200 million. There's another one in there, the name of whom I forgot. But then you can still give each one of those 40 people like at least $15 million, right? So basically, the amount of money that tech platforms expect to make with AI allows them to pay unprecedented amount of money to their employees. And in that way, if you pay someone these astronomical amounts of money, then they get, they become, they gain a lot of power, and they become very powerful there in their role, right? Because Zuckerberg basically says you are worth us like a $250 million, and that means that these people have a lot of leeway. So it reminds me a little bit of what happened in World War II with the Manhattan Project. They hired all those nuclear physicists that had just discovered nuclear fission. Otto Hahn discovered that in 1938 with Lise Meitner and Fritz Strassmann in Germany, and then it was pretty quickly figured out that this should end, or this would end up in a bomb. And the Americans started to start the Manhattan Project after Einstein raised concerns that the Germans may be working on a bomb, and they actually were, but they ran out of resources towards the end of the war. Okay, so we look at the Manhattan Project, and what happened there, that all the nuclear physicists were basically hired by the military-industrial complex, the MIC, and they needed them because they didn't understand nuclear physics at all, right? So all of a sudden, you have these scientists becoming ruling class adjacent, right? And they had a lot of leverage because they they knew they were the magicians, right? They had access to a technology that military leaders didn't yet fully understand. And even if they had taken the blueprints out of the hands of nuclear physicists, they wouldn't have known what to do with it, right? So, but then immediately after Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the conclusion of the Second World War, people like Niels Bohr, Leo Szilard, and Joseph Rotblat, they pushed for international control and limits on nuclear weapons, and saw themselves as guardians of the new technology, and that didn't well. That didn't sit well with the general class, right? They formed the Federation of Atomic Scientists, and they advocated civilian use, using uranium in nuclear reactors, but not military uses. And there was a backlash then, right? So one point, the previous ruling class, the military industrial complex generals and national leaders, they basically learned enough to now control nuclear development without the original core group of scientists. Right after a while, they understood how to find their way around in nuclear physics, and they already did some of the policy decisions, like when they started to pursue the hydrogen bomb. They made that largely without those original scientists' consent, and security clearances were revoked for people like Oppenheimer, and basically, they sent a message to scientists that they could advise but not dictate military policy. And I think Edward Teller, was one of the scientists that stuck with it and that basically joined up with the military ruling class. But the rest was basically BTFO'd into a managerial class, right? There's also this scene in Oppenheimer in the movie, and I don't know whether that really happened, but it illustrates pretty well the mindset where Oppenheimer goes after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs had fallen. Oppenheimer goes into Truman's office and wants to warn him of the danger of nuclear proliferation and nuclear weapons. And then Truman basically told him, basically kicked him out of his office in also many words and friendly manner. But it was heard that Truman said that I dropped the bomb. Truman dropped the bomb, and he basically said, "I never want to see this whiner again in my office," meaning Oppenheimer, right? So basically, that's the military class saying, "No, you know what? Now that you built us the bomb, we'll take it from here, okay?" And so then the forays of physicists and scientists into the ruling class were more or less stopped at that point. But there's still a little bit of a turnover. You can expect that people like Teller and others, did bring their scientific acumen into the governing class, and so the atomic scientists, but largely went from indispensable figures that set the agenda, and they basically became specialized contractors inside a larger military bureaucracy, right? And people like Edward Teller retained prestige, but they also lost political autonomy as a group, right? So now you could imagine that if you look at Palantir and other software that uses AI for law enforcement, right? You can imagine that the new class of elite tech programmers, the new elite tech class, gets squeamish at one point when they realize that their technology is used for national security and police forces, right? And they could basically also react similar to the nuclear physicists and say, "Look, we gave you AI, but this is not what we want, so you can't use this any further, or we have to warn you of using." And now, then it may be that the ruling class says, "No problem, we take it from here," and then pushes the AI tech class back into managerial class. However, I think there's a difference to the nuclear physicists back then. The nuclear physicists had no independent venue where they could reach people. They had no way of being independent. They depended on a lab infrastructure where they can work. They depended on a research university. If they didn't have that, they were pretty much lost and could basically be kicked out by the ruling class. But the modern AI tech guys, and that's why I led with the initial story, people like Deitke, they needed to have 250 million to come work for Zuckerberg because they already had their own projects. They're basically independent, wealthy, independently powerful, and some of the AI guys are already, they are already advising heads of state. They have a lot of independent. They have a lot of independent platform. So I don't think that they get kicked out by the by the current ruling class in any future version. They will always have more. They will always have more power behind them. They don't need any government for them to make their way. Now, the governments would still be able to strike back in several ways. For example, they could put regulated controls on AI, right? They could do licensing. They could do expert controls. They could require compliance when it comes to computing, chips, cloud infrastructure, right? So government has a lot of levers where it could actually squeeze out a tech class. And it could also be, they could also frame AI developers as a national security threat, and revoke their security clearances, like just as they did with Oppenheimer. And basically, I think they could do something similar that they did to the atomic physicist ruling class or atomic physicists class. But I don't think they will be as successful in cutting them off. So because these new tech bros, they are actually independently wealthy, and if need be, they can also vanish. I mean, you have that ability with technology nowadays, right? They are they're not really easy to control. All they need to get access to their stuff is a computer, and if somebody takes their tech,
We lost you, Florian. Florian, we lost your voice. We can't hear you, Florian. Okay, so right now you're muted.
does it work now?
Yeah, it works now.
Okay, so I've been cut off. I actually looked at the chat to see whether anyone would telling me I was not, they couldn't hear me, but it was apparently last minute. What was the last thing I said?
You were saying if they take their computers away, and then you cut out.
Yeah. So basically, that I basically then only very little got cut off. So basically, in contrast to nuclear physicists after World War II, modern AI tech bros, they don't need access to government installations. They need a computer, and if somebody takes their AI tech away, if the governments do that, they can go somewhere else and reprogram it. I'm sure they could build it from scratch anew. So they are much more independent than nuclear physicists were in 1945.
Yeah, but you see here there's kind of an inverted issue here. So to your story, Florian, right? The fact that the nuclear physicist scientists were kind of like the magicians, that even if, say someone uninitiated had a blueprint or a schematic, they still couldn't read it, right? It wouldn't do them any good. So not only was there a bottleneck with access to the experiment sites, there was a bottleneck with access to the knowledge to understand what was going on. I think in this regard, AI is a bit different because on the one hand, yes, it does exist in physical space in these like server farms and whatnot, and it's made to be easily used, right? So I don't see the bottleneck quite being as pronounced because anybody, it's meant to be used by anyone, right? That's the entire point of these AI tools, is that anybody with, people who are not tech savvy can then utilize these to, work through life. And so I wonder to what extent that would undermine your thesis.
Well, yeah, that's one thing. I mean, AI, so programming can be learned, right? Much more easily than nuclear physics could be. And with the tools we all have nowadays at our disposal, this is also a very different situation from the nuclear physicists. That is true, right? They had 10 years at universities, or maybe less sometimes. They became, they got the PhD very, very early because they were really smart. But yeah, you couldn't just read a physics book and then be up to snuff with nuclear physics, right? Because that was all new, and you needed to have a solid understanding of physics before. Yet, like, it took like maybe 5 to 6 years, or maybe a little bit longer. But eventually, they also didn't need Oppenheimer because they had understood enough of what he was doing technically, and also they had enough people that were moving over to their camp, right? Teller wasn't the only one who started to work for the government and with the government. And you can make the same point with AI. What the new AI tech bros do, what someone like Matt Deitke did, was basically doing AI for 3D object recognition and basically robot engineering and stuff like that, that's not something that you can easily whip up on your computer either. So I guess it's a little similar in a way that maybe the regime would need a couple years to catch up. But you're right, Todd. It's more difficult for them to catch up back then than it is now. But it's a difference in degree, not in. It doesn't play in a different. I mean, AI tech doesn't play in a different stadium than nuclear physics in that respect. So it's a difference in degrees, not in abstract levels.
Well, there's another thing too that I think is a significant difference now than the time you're talking about. In the 1940s, it was really only in the United States that you had any large body of nuclear physicists anywhere in the world that actually could understand what they were talking about or do this research. Whereas at this point, AI technology is worldwide. It's not just US tech pros. China has their own version. Presumably Europe will get one eventually, if not already. And I could see Russia getting one as well. And in that regard, they don't quite have the monopolistic leverage that an Oppenheimer would have had, because there was nobody else in the world that could have done what he did, right? So I think this is another area in which the AI, though powerful, no doubt, as far as an interest group and class, the tech bros, it's different. I think their power is not quite as monopolistic as the power of the nuclear physicists in the 40s.
So you're basically saying that the $250 million were overvalued in a way.
I mean, that's probably the case. So, like, for example, a common like old left critique of the modern corporate world is that I think before the 60s, the most that a CEO was paid beyond an employee was like 50 times. And then it just skyrocketed to like 1,000 times more than the lowest paid employee. And then the argument's like, well, this isn't because the CEO is working harder or doing better. It's because of the way the system is set up to then pay him more for nominal work as opposed to all the people that make it work. And so I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. Sort of like, or also too, like with sports teams, where individual players are paid obscenely large amounts of money because they're artificially valued, right? They're because they exist in this space of sports entertainment, they get paid a lot more than they would otherwise. It's sort of like the water paradox, right? Where water is necessary for life, but not as valuable as gold, which is weird because you can't eat or drink gold, right? And so I think that's part of what's going on.
Well, that's actually a good example because I know a little bit about baseball. I followed it for a while, and they pay pitchers regularly $200 million for the top star pitchers. They get $200 million or more over 8 years. But everyone knows that after 4 years into the contract, the pitcher will be significantly less good than he was at the beginning, right? So in a way, baseball pitchers, and to a certain extent the sluggers as well, they are overrated, right? They're overvalued, but the sports team pay that much because that's just the bottleneck that they need to get through. That's just what these pitchers and their agents are asking for. And so if someone isn't paying $200 for Justin Verlander, he goes to another team. Quite simple, right? That is willing to pay 200 or even more than $200 million. And everyone knows it is not the value of that person, not his value as a pitcher. He had like 3 Cy Young, the biggest awards that you can get. He threw like 3 no hitters. He like fantastic, directly Hall of Fame potential. But now he is basically sitting on the bench, if at all. He now pitches for San Francisco Giants, and he is if he's not injured, he pitches a game where he allows 4 runs or something. He's not what he used to be, right? And that's what always happens. But somebody paid him $200 million up front that were worth it, but they paid basically for 3 or 4 years. After that, his ability dropped off. And so Yeah, that's the capitalism. I heard the exact same criticism that you mentioned. Nobody is worth $250 million. Yeah, but that's what the market values you at, and the market isn't really efficient. On the long run, the market is efficient. On the short run, the market is not at all efficient, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to make a fortune from arbitraging different markets against one another, and so on and so forth, right? So that's a problem. Nobody determines but the market how much value something or some person has, and that can be overvalued. Yes.
So that's part of it. But so the other thing too is with the tech bros and the nature of AI, because AI is sort of the example you're using here, is that unlike say atomic weapons, it's not actually destructive in itself. It might be adjacent to something destructive, and maybe it controls an automated drone swarm, right? Maybe it helps the general plan a campaign, but it's not destructive in itself. And I think that's another significant difference between the modern tech bros and the 1940s physicists, and that what they have, the knowledge they have, and the tools that they offer governments and corporations are not necessarily destructive in themselves. So they could be used for destructive purposes, right? And they're containable, right? You can't really contain a thermonuclear reaction. It's just once it happens, right? In a weapon sense, you can't really contain it, right? Whereas with AI, you could still, contain its application.
You could, in a way. What also difference between the nuclear physicists and tech bros. The nuclear physicists, they were completely motivated by knowledge, right? They just want to understand what keeps mass together. And then they found, well, basically they tried shooting neutrons at different elements, and they found that Otto Hahn basically found that uranium, after they shot several neutrons at them, that they didn't have uranium anymore, but a different element. And so he didn't even think about using that for a bomb, but that was governments pretty quickly figured out that you could use it for a bomb, because the energy that gets freed per nucleus is very, very, very small. But since like 1 kilogram of any material has like many nucleus, many nuclei, yeah, it can basically expand. And so they weren't motivated. They were motivated by knowledge, and then probably also by status. Being part of the government is, of course, something nice that will drive, especially scientists. And scientists are pretty much status driven, knowledge and status driven. And then they said, no, wait a second, we don't want to use this for warfare. But I got the impression that tech bros are more driven by knowledge seeking, but also more by monetary interest, and by becoming free and independent. I think that's one big difference. People that are in AI and crypto and all that, one big motivation is to be independent of society. Whereas nuclear scientists, they wanted to be actually leaders of society. They want to be acknowledged for their role in society. So that's also a different aspect, and that I wonder whether that would also mean there are different ways of placate the tech bros versus the nuclear physicists, if governments should need to do that.
Yeah. So the idea that the tech bros, so there's like the real issue here then is, I'm not contesting the point that the tech bros could become an important part of the ruling class or a technocracy. In some cases, they already have that element, right? It's just maybe more of it in the future. But I think there's enough distinctions between them and the earlier scientists that it's going to look different. Like the first thing was the idea that the knowledge is not as monopolistic as it was back then, right? Because back then, only a handful of people in the United States could really do this. Nobody else in the world really could. That's not true now. Two, we talked about we just talked about a few other things as well here. So I think that ultimately it's not quite as, you can't contain it as easily because AI is just all over the place, rather than and it's not destructive. And then we also mentioned just the profit-driven nature of the tech bros. See, here's the key thing, right? If you look at long-term scientific development, it's not really correlated to the free market because you can't make quarterly profits. It's too long of an avenue to shoot past. It has to be it usually is government driven, like atomic energy, like information technology, like the internet, which is basically DARPA. The internet's DARPA. Okay, it started in California in the 50s. So all of this stuff
in Utah,
all of this stuff really gets started with the government. Right now, it's been created. You can now privatize it and sell it, right? But to actually create it, there was the government. So I think in that sense, we're going to have, I would actually suspect we wouldn't have as much technological advancement because the demands of the market, as you said, are inefficient in the short term. It would create downward pressure that would actually delay innovation because the kinds of long-term innovative products wouldn't get funded because you're not going to make money in the next 3 quarters.
Yeah, that's certainly true. But I wonder whether if you're able to program new platforms and new AI, whether you play for the long run anyway, not for getting any immediate profit.
Sir, can you say that again? I was reading the chat.
I said I wonder whether I'm not sure what role that plays, the short-term versus long-term benefit, because I think independent, if you're a scientist or if you're a programmer, you think about long-term. You have to think about the long-term. You're not a salesman. Salesmen think in the here and now. I have a friend who's a salesman who says, like, if he gets a customer at 8 p.m. who wants to sign an insurance contract, he goes there and he's completely motivated and he really wants to go there from 0 to 100 in 10 minutes. And scientists and AI programmers, they are usually doing marathon projects over several months, at least to several years. So that's actually a similar style of work.
Yeah, but like the idea though with the sort of like groundbreaking technological innovations not working within an existing paradigm generally are not profitable until they've already been done, until the work's already been done. Then you can profit off of. So, for example, nylon was developed in World War II by the U.S. Air Force as a substitute material, partly for parachute strings, and all of the civilian uses of nylon are after the fact.
Right, that's true. Yes.
And so, sure, you can make a lot of money with nylon civilian products now, but you know the point is that's not how it got started. So, because of the different incentives, see, I actually think what you're going to have this is I think going to be paradoxical to some people, but when you have the older scientists, you know, that were more driven by knowledge and status and were in the government, so they weren't under any competitive. Okay, status seeking is competitive, but what I mean is, for maintaining their lifestyle, they were not engaged in competitive endeavors. They knew they were going to get paid by the government. They knew they were going to have their lifestyle. That actually allowed them to be riskier in their research. Whereas I think what you're going to have is a more conservative, less risky approach with market innovation like this, because you're not sure that you're going to have a job if this falls out, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's probably one other reason why they were asking for so much, because it's riskier, right? Government scientists don't earn as much, right? That's also clear. There was always the balance. You either go to into private business in the economy, and then you basically earn much more, but you also have to pay a lot of things out of your own pocket. If you are a government worker, you have your pension, you have health insurance and all that being taken care of. So you can, yes, you get less per month, but in the end, it is not really that much less if you compare over a longer time horizon. And then you can basically live a same upper middle class lifestyle than other people can. But you earn less, but it doesn't really matter because many things are already taken care of.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we could envision, continuing with your train of thought here. Let's say hypothetically some future US government wants to, so in like the same way that, so the Windows operating system was then, when the government moved from like analog accounting of information to digital, Microsoft made a killing because they were the ones that were giving the government the computers and operating systems to manage that transition. So
Right.
if you were to imagine a future transition where, say, Elon Musk supplies all the sort of AI tools that the government wants to use in a major upgrade of their computer processing power, yeah, he would have a tremendous amount of influence once that transition was completed, because it was his programs, his design that was used. But that would only occur after such a sweeping reform took place. And then what would he do with that influence? Well, I mean, I suppose he could tell the government to do a lot of things, like Bill Gates told the government to do a lot of things. I mean, it was, Bill Gates is really influential in getting the government to go through with the vaccine mandates, right? So,
Yeah, well, we already saw what happened because Elon Musk, when the big beautiful bill didn't have the credits for electric vehicles, or were reduced credits or whatever, he didn't like it. Then he came up all of a sudden with a tweet that he's dismantling the Dragon aircraft, right? Which was supposed to be a part of government and SpaceX collaboration, and where people said, look, this guy is a loose cannon. We cannot abide this guy in close to government. We have to strengthen NASA instead, because we cannot be dependent on one guy. He throws a tantrum, and the entire program, whatever program you start, is just stopped because he just takes his tools and goes back home. Something that nuclear physicists also couldn't do, by the way, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So in that way, in that way, uh, governments may be leery to actually work together with tech bros, or let them get as much security clearance, or shared resources in government, right? So that it's not always wise to put your government programs into the hand of a few corporations or tech people. Also, what has always been understood was that you always have a certain blind mass of people that really cannot do anything. They are not good for anything. They're not smart enough. They're not driven enough. Whatever. But you give them some make believe jobs, right? Some very basic stuff. They can look, sweep the floor, or they can assemble some low maintenance devices or whatever, right? You give them something very easy to do so that they still do something productive for society. Because the alternative is that you have them build tent cities in big cities, and you can say, I don't care about the homeless, but okay, but once they start attacking you and robbing you, and there's all kinds of other social mischief there, then this matters, right? People that have no future and they cannot do anything, you leave them completely to their own devices, they start acting against you. And so there's always sort of societal contract that companies will always absorb this bottom set of society. But now, with the introduction of AI, that contract is actually violated. It's being violated because AI can now take over all these simple jobs, and you don't need these people anymore. And all of a sudden, you will end up with people who cannot do anything, to find no job, who will basically be unemployed, homeless. And the only way that governments can react there is by introducing UBI, or any other measure to keep those people in check. And that is already something that the tech bros did that was not really good for society.
Well, for the but for the daily black pill, I think the profitable and likely solution will be euthanasia. That's going to be the solution that governments are going to turn to.
Youth in Asia. Okay, so we bring them all we export them into the Mongolia or Siberia.
No, it's going to be Canada's made. That's going to probably be the solution.
Where, Canada?
No, MAID. What about
Maine?
medical assistance in dying? I think that's what it's called.
Oh, Maine, Canada's Maine. Yeah, yeah.
That'll
Um,
probably be the solution. It's profitable. It'll get rid of all these people. It's really dark, and but we've been prepped.
I saw a movie about that, like that predicted something like that. Um, uh, how would they call it? I forgot. The people, basically people got like some basic chicken feed to eat. Basically, had a certain name, and
Soylent Green.
Soylent Green. That's it. Soylent Green. Yeah, Soylent Green.
Yeah, it'll
That's
be
the
that.
future.
It'll be Soylent Green. Yeah, but the thing is though the actual influence that these people are going to wield, I think, while significant, it won't be as monopolistic as these earlier iterations of scientists. Um, and for all the reasons that we gave. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't have an outsized influence given what they can do, but I don't think they'll be quite as able to dictate terms to governments. And then,
unless
unless,
unless they form their own government, right? Unless they start using AI to build their own infrastructure and have sort of like a stealth government infrastructure. They will still be part of society, but they run their own things and nobody really knows who they are. So basically, if they have a shadow economy, they are very difficult to choke off, right? There's no choke point anymore, because they could basically build their own governments. And I don't think that's too far fetched. I can absolutely imagine a future where AI bros have their own things. I think, who was it, Musk or some other people already thought about just building a city just for employees, and employees would basically form a city. Well, you can also stay anonymous and have kind of like a city online that nobody really knows about, but it's like distributed everywhere, right? And insiders know, but it's not really a geographically fenced off area. It's like everywhere around the whole world, you have your own digital nation. That is possible. And if you have that, it's very difficult for governments to just cut those people off. They'll have their independent resources.
well, right, but then the thing is though, a government could then outsource to another country that has it, like say China or maybe
Yeah,
Europe. Right. So let's say it's the U.S. federal government, right? We're talking about they could do that, or they could just have their own. I mean, they could have their own team of AI engineers as well. So because ultimately the knowledge is out there, it's open source at this point, right? Whereas the nuclear physics knowledge in the 40s was not open source. It took
right.
like you said, magicians, these highly trained uh, arcana wizards basically to understand it, and it was localized. It wasn't all over the world where all sorts of different people could use it. I think that actually in the long run might undermine the tech bros themselves, where they're actually creating a world in which information is so super abundant that their ability to leverage insider knowledge or trade secrets is undermined.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. I tend to maybe overvalue them a little bit in my own mind, but they were. I mean, the most of society they're already building systems, and most of society hasn't even caught up to 10% of that. So sometimes I wonder whether with even like open source, whether society will really catch up. I mean, Linux has been open source forever, and it has never been a threat to Windows, right? Because people, it's not just. I don't think anymore that's just because Windows is the more convenient solution, or Mac operating systems now as well. It's just because you need to be basically all the time thinking about things. You need to be so independent that computers need to be on your mind. You need to work somehow with computers that you use Linux, and a normal person will never use Linux. And I'm wondering, even if AI is open source, whether people will really use it. I mean, they use it when it's in proprietary software. I'm sure in the future we can just have our Google glasses and just like snap a finger, and then that's the way we buy stuff from Amazon or something like that. So we use AI there, and then Amazon AI will suggest certain products that we may buy next, and so on and so forth. That's what people will do. But going out there and building your own algorithms, building your own programs, your own software platforms. I'm not sure that the majority of people will actually do that. I think it's still it's still seen as some exotic thing that tech bros do, but nobody else.
Right. I'm not saying that all or even most people will do it, but what I'm saying is, okay, so the power of the tech elite is directly correlated to knowledge, which is directly correlated to their monopolistic control of that area. So in the 1940s, that's like maximal, control, maximal monopolistic control of knowledge. We now have a serious, we've moved very far away from that, even before the AI revolution, due to the internet. And I think what the AI revolution will do even further is it will further diffuse that, so that those people who would otherwise have been checked by barriers to entry. So in the 40s, if you wanted to do any sort of research with nuclear physics, you'd have to be a part of the government. You couldn't just do this on your own at home, writing on a pad of paper. Whereas now with AI tools, you can do all sorts of things at home without having to actually have, because you can run simulations with AI, so you don't need the brick and mortar buildings that the scientists needed in the 40s. You have such a, we can barely grasp how much the monopoly on information is going to be broken by AI. And so if we just keep breaking the monopoly of information, it's going to have a feedback effect where it undermines the power of the tech elite, because that power is based on knowledge. And if that knowledge is shared, well, you're just not monopolistic anymore.
Yeah, I think it's true.
So yeah, I mean, what's interesting is if they do become a more traditional elite, I don't know if they'll last very long, because I think what they'll do is they'll create a status quo that actually undermines their privileged status.
Yeah, there's also something to be said that if you want real power in the real world, you still need to have armies and access to military, right? Which it's difficult to see that any tech entrepreneur could reasonably get that, right? I don't think. First of all, most of these guys are not interested in building their own army, and second of all, the governments will not let anyone, would not let their military hardware proliferate beyond their own control, right? So and if you and it's fine if the tech entrepreneurs want to have their own little country, maybe they have their own groups and they have practice stealth well and all that.
Seasteading, right?
Say again?
You remember seasteading? That was kind of their thing. Seasteading, the idea.
Oh, seasteading. Yeah, I remember. I think libertarians now are rather embarrassed about seasteading, but yeah, it was a thing. Yeah, you can seastead, but actually, governments still have armies, and actually, there was one anarchist project in front of to the west of the Italian coast that got shut down pretty quickly by the military. That was seasteading in a way, right? I forgot the name of that. But that was an interesting aspect. But the Italian government, not really known for the military power. It's not the Italians are not an army that conquers the world. The Germans are, the Americans, the Chinese, the Russians, not really the Italians. And don't want to. If you're Italian, it's okay. But even the Italian army basically took care of that seastead right after 2 weeks or something like that in front of their coast. They wouldn't allow that. And yeah, so if you want to have real power, but what does that power give you? That's the next question, right? Suppose you're a government, you have all the military in the world, but what are you getting with that? If the market streams don't really run through your country, then your military hardware isn't worth much.
Yeah, the other thing too is the amount of power that AI could give governments or other people. And we mentioned this in our stream on AI 2 weeks ago, is since it creates unless you are very, very careful how you use it, and I don't think many people in government or big tech are going to be, you're going to run the risk of confirmation bias and creating a simulation. So even if you did want to fight a war and use AI to help plan it, it's only as good as the information that it's trained on that you give it. And so, as we already saw with the Taliban in Afghanistan, it's like, well, the U.S. can't handle reality. Reality is just too difficult for the U.S. to handle. The AI, all you have to do is just feed it correct data. But the problem is the Americans aren't going to do that. The Chinese might. They just want to win, so maybe they'll do it. But right now, Americans aren't going to feed it real information. They're going to feed it bromides and comfortable lies that allow them to have full spectrum dominance in their head, but not on real life. So actually, this might actually be less effective at power generation than people might think.
Yeah, I think ChatGPT and Grok and all these LLMs are basically large language models, are basically just one aspect of AI, right? It has nothing to do with what Palantir does with their stuff. It has nothing really to do with how essential infrastructure is maintained using AI, how drones are directly using AI. That AI is something that there's probably like the LLMs just make out like 10% of all the AI there is, right? And AI is used in many different ways that people are not really even aware of, and so that will then determine how nations develop and where society goes. Like, I don't know, one simple example is line calls in tennis matches. They have now systems, the big tournaments, they have like systems of eight high resolution cameras all around the stadium, and then they have an AI that basically takes the camera information and calculates the speed, the direction of the ball, the spin of the ball, and can then develop, together with the heat and the wind and the air pressure and everything, it develops something called its hawk eye. It basically gives you exact prediction where the ball will come up, and if the ball is outside the lines, even just 1 millimeter, it's a miss, right? And this AI-driven apparatus can basically predict that the ball will be outside the line by a millimeter, and it frequently, when they're still at line judges, it absolutely almost 100% overlapped with what the line judges said. So this is already a way that AI works that people aren't really aware. People think, oh, there's a computer and it takes like a high resolution snapshot where the ball is. No, the computer just predicts where the ball was or the ball will bounce. And there's other examples like that, I'm sure, that we're not really aware of, that's AI driven, and that is already changing us in ways that we're not even realizing. And that kind of AI may actually have a bigger impact on society than what we think of AI, like ChatGPT.
So let me ask you this, Florian. Given the sort of differences I've highlighted between the current tech elite and then the tech elite from the 1940s, which as challenges to the general thesis you're presenting, what do you make of all that cumulatively in the face of your initial claim?
What was my initial claim?
Well, that they would be able to wield power similar to the nuclear physicists and put pressure on the government in the way that the nuclear physicists did to, say, produce nuclear deproliferation.
I would say they will also, and I think we haven't really talked about that, but they will not wield as much power because the situation will be a different one. The lines were clearly drawn in 45. Nuclear physicists develop nuclear weapons and don't want military use of nuclear power. That's a very clear, defined aspect. AI nowadays can do anything and everywhere, right? The same AI technology that's used in Palantir is used somewhere else, and it uses so many different incarnations that it was really difficult to say for anyone you can't use it in a military way, because any AI that is used in a civilian way is being used by anyone else in a military way, right? There's not like one access, as you said, to the technology, and there's two groups that have access. One group, the military-industrial complex regulates regulates access by scientists. Scientists regulate access on the knowledge level. That doesn't exist. These differences, these clear lines are not drawn in the sand. It's a very blurry mass of different lines that the technology is not. There's no clear military nuclear power and civilian nuclear power. There's no clear military AI and civilian AI. There's like all shades of, it's all gray, and there's shades of military and shades of civilian use. For that reason, I think over time it's probably just that the ruling class will become more open to technology, and will have like I don't think there will be any drama like they took away security clearance from Oppenheimer. That was a big step. I don't think something like that happens. Yeah, maybe here and there somebody loses security clearance, somebody else gains it, but isn't not going to be as spectacular, because the lines are very smooth. There's no clear black or white, and for that reason you cannot really tell someone don't use it for military ways and only use it for civilian ways, because everything civilian is military and military is civilian, vice versa. Well, especially with the fourth generation asymmetric warfare.
Well, all of these distinctions were a lot more clear in the 40s, and due to the growth of technology, they're all much less clear. They're all more porous, right? So that's a big
porous, part of it. Clear boundaries, porous boundaries.
Yeah, and that I think is the main difference. And my main prediction will be that what the tech pros will do is they'll make the already porous boundaries even more porous, because what AI tools will allow people to do is it will further degrade the knowledge monopoly that the tech elite needs to be the tech elite. Because that's what made Oppenheimer an elite individual, is he had this knowledge that nobody else had, and it was not shared. And and see, because here's the thing, right? What you talked about specifically at the beginning was even if somebody in the military could get the blueprints, they wouldn't be able to read them. They wouldn't be able to understand what they mean. What AI does is it translates all of that text speak out into some sort of digestible content that anybody can use. So somebody who doesn't understand all the ins and outs of quantum mechanics can talk to the AI about black holes and have, they'll get something out of it, maybe something like the Science Channel level, but they'll get something. It won't be like a complete black box, like trying to read, nuclear blueprints in 1948.
Yeah, and even then they caught up pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I would say that, well, there's one question I do want to get to real quickly. Caravaggio says, what's the possibility that the Luddite position becomes fashionable, high status? Pretty good, actually, because what we're dealing with here, going to Joseph Tainter and his definition of collapse, you go from a high energy state to a low energy state. Part of the reason why complex systems collapse is they over specialize. There's diminishing returns in these complex investments, right? So let's look at military technology, for example, right? When you get guns, peasants can kill knights, and then you just keep running with that. Tanks defeat everything else until you get like missiles, right? And then the airplanes are another leveler until you get missiles again. But now what we're seeing in Ukraine is that amongst peers with like near equivalent military potential, you get Gridlock. So the point is, technology is now no longer the obvious. So a technological solution to something is not obviously the best solution anymore, right? It's not obviously the best solution anymore because there's all of these diminishing returns that we've been hiding that are now bubbling to the surface that have been attached to the use of technology, right? And so I think because of that, we will see in certain sectors an increasing Luddite performance because there's no other way to deal with these externalities.
Yeah, you can easily imagine a future where you have people that go back to agriculture, but they have automatic sliding doors in their houses, right? It's easy to imagine that people will retain some kind of technology, but still go back to a very basic non-technological way of running their society.
Yeah, or maybe they have a 3D printer at home to, like, I don't know, make
Yeah,
tools when they need it, right? So
exactly.
there's that. So yeah, do you anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up, Florian?
No, I think we said everything. I believe I'm very optimistic though. I think the future will be great. We don't even imagine what can happen, and so I'm looking forward.
All right. Well, thank you, Florian. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Flight podcast signing off.